And I want to start by introducing Professor Greenstein. I should say that if I start like citing all the places that where he studied and taught, we would go through the hour, burn through the hour, and still be counting them. So I'll just mention a few. Patur belo chlum I efshar. You cannot, there is not an option of saying nothing. So he studied at the best university, then taught at the best universities, among which is Cambridge University, where he did his PhD, and Yale University.
No, Columbia.
No,
Yeah.
right. He taught at Yale, and he did a PhD in Columbia, right. Sorry. Your alma mater, I don't want to mess, and in the JDS, the famous Jewish Theological Seminary, and in many other institutions around the world. In Israel, I think, except for Beersheba and Haifa, you did everything, right? Jerusalem and mainly Bar-Ilan, but also Tel Aviv, and all around. He is an ace of all institutions, right? Moreover, I should say that I had the pleasure of being his student about 9 years ago. And as you know, most of my studies I did at the Hebrew University, but I did take some of the courses at Bar-Ilan University, and I had the pleasure of taking 2 different courses the same day with Professor Greenstein. One was in Hebrew, the other was in English. And I think, except for Professor Tov, maybe, I had no other teacher of which I learned both in Hebrew and in English. So that's a cool factor. And it was the same day that I took Job and Ecclesiastes with him, and I enjoyed immensely both. So for me, it's an honor, a privilege, and a pleasure to have you here, Professor Greenstein. I should say that it's a little bit, well, okay. The connection should be all right now. You should be able to hear me better now. So I should say that it's a little bit like a candy store for me, for a child that gets into a candy store where he sees all of these good stuff. Having you here is for, like me, a candy store, as I can ask you so many questions and so many things that I'm interested in. I see you as a leading authority in so many things like that. I should also mention that you have declared as one of the winners of the EMET Prize for the year 2020. That's the equivalent of the Israeli Nobel Prize. So, guys, an Israeli Nobel laureate, that no less, and almost like an equivalent Nobel, I should say. And we could talk about so many things, but I want to talk mainly about your recent, last year, published work of the translation of the book of Job. So that's the plan. And if anything else, if there is anything else I forgot to say, it is crucial. You've got, we're happy to hear you introducing yourself.
Okay. Well, I don't, I'm like most people, I don't really enjoy long introductions. And so I'm just happy to be here, and we can talk and learn something together. You wanted me to talk about biblical poetry.
Right. We'll get everything, and I want to start off by actually asking, what is poetry? Okay. And I should say that the translation of the book of Job, as I see it, again, you don't like long introductories, but I will say something. I think that that your training as both an expert in Semitic languages and comparative Semitics, as well as an expert on poetry and theory of poetry and theory of literature in general, makes your viewpoint very unique in the realm of biblical scholars, and extremely interesting and extremely capable in doing this translation, which has been, I would guess, a fruit of decades of working, because I know you've been publishing dozens of papers on the book of Job. And so it's very interesting to see that unique combination fields of interest within biblical scholarship that you bring to the table in that context. And I want to start off with the most basic question that we can ask, and that is, what is poetry, really?
Okay. This question is very complex, where the answer is very complex, because there are basically two different ways of looking at poetry. Most people think of poetry as what we call verse, right? That is, prose is just, is writing in sentences of varying lengths without any particular rhythm necessarily. You can have a long sentence and followed by a short sentence, a simple sentence followed by a complex sentence, etc. In verse, at least until pretty modern times, when you have free verse, verse was usually highly structured. One of my old friends, who was a literature professor, used to say that the only way you can really describe verse is just to call it writing in short lines. In other words, prose is lines of any length. They can be very long. They can be, complex. But poetry is basically writing in limited length lines of limited length, and usually lines that have similar length to each other, and usually in Western conventions, in Western poetics, there is also usually a certain meter, that is a certain rhythm that's followed, so that the stresses, the accents in the line also follow a pattern, like da 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 da, or da 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 da.
Right.
Etc.
Like the famous dactylic hexameter of the Homeric epic poems.
Yeah. So, and it seems that in ancient Semitic poetry, there was some kind of meter, but it wasn't as strict as it was in Greek and Roman, and certainly not as strict as in the European meters that we're used to. Anyway, so one way of looking at poetry is that there are certain conventions of structuring it. Now, while we're on this subject, in the West, we're used to lines of poetry not only sharing a particular meter, a repetitive rhythm, but also rhyme. And there can be a rhyme scheme where each line rhymes with the one before, or there can be an alternating pattern. But whatever it is, there's usually rhyme, as in most popular songs, for example. However, in Semitic, as many of you, if not all of you know, words, the meaning of words, the significant part of words, is carried by a root. It's not carried by the last syllable in the word. Usually the last syllable in the word in Semitic is a grammatical suffix, the plural, the feminine ending, something like that. So there tends not to be very much rhyming in biblical verse. However, what there is what we call parallelism, right? Parallelism means that the two lines have a structure that is somehow repetitive. I like to define this.
How do you fall in the two categories of, if we take from the very classical old Bishop Leff category of parallelism all the way to Professor James Kugel, no parallelism. Where do you fall? I don't know if it's
no, he doesn't say there's no
but,
parallelism.
right.
Google thinks that
A, what's more B?
That there's a lot of parallelism in biblical prose also, and that you can't really draw a sharp distinction between poetry and prose in the Bible. I disagree with him on that for various reasons. But let me get back to this parallel. I'm not talking now about the same categories as Robert Loth suggested in the mid-18th century. What I'm saying is there are three basic principles of parallelism, and they can fall all together, or you can have only one of them. But usually there's more than one at a time. Okay, the basic principle is, and this was pointed out by a later contemporary of Bishop Loth, named uh, Herder, J.G. von Herder, in his great book from the late 18th century called The Spirit of Hebrew Poetry, written in German, but it was translated into English in the early 19th century. In any case, the idea is that the two lines are balanced, right? That there's a balance between the two lines. The lines take about the same time to read. They're approximately the same in length. There are always exceptions, but that I think is the basic rule. That's the first basic principle of parallelism. Second basic principle of parallelism is that you have a repetition of the syntactic structure. That the syntax, right, the sentence structure of one line is repeated in the next, sometimes with deletions, that is, you leave certain things out and you add other things in, and you have to look sometimes at what we call the deep structure of the sentences in order to see the parallel structure, not only on the surface structure. To give you an example, the deep structure of the following two sentences is the same, according to Chomsky and generative linguistics. For example, the ball was hit by Joe, which is passive, and Joe hit the ball, right? They have the same underlying structure, which is that there's a subject, Joe, right, who did some hitting, and what he did the hitting on was a ball, right? And you can say it in different ways. Okay, so sometimes the deep structure has to be looked at in order to appreciate the syntactic repetition. Nevertheless, you have that. What you find a lot in ancient Semitic poetry is that the verb is all present and accounted for in the first line, but it's left out in the second line. A good example of that is in the poem of Lemech, or the song of Lemech, or Lamech, in Genesis chapter 4, where he says that I would, ki ish haragti lifitzi, I would kill, slay a man for my being wounded. In other words, if someone wounds me, I will slay him. The yeled lechaburati, even a young man or a boy for being wounded by that person. And the, very good. And the, you can see it over here in verse 23. In any case, you can see that the verb is left out of the second line, but the noun lechaburati has more syllables than lefitzi, actually the prepositional phrase, and so there's a certain balance that's kept anyway in those lines.
Right. So just to summarize this kind of concept, when an element, usually the verb, is missing from the second bicola, the second line of the verse or the second verse of the parallelism, then we are very, very likely to see kind of a compensation in a form of an expansion.
Right. That's right. Okay. And the third principle of parallelism is that very often there's a tradition of using certain words together in parallel. For example, sky, earth, or silver, gold.
This again can take us to the prose as well. If we consider the first verse of the Bible, et hashamayim ve'et ha'aretz, these pair words.
But they're not in parallel lines.
No, sure. But the origin, the Canaanite origin of word pairs, noted by Del Berlin and many others, she classifies them into different categories, and shamayim va'aretz as contrasting each other is something that we find in prose and poetry as well. So as far as the Canaanite setting of it, it's somewhat similar. Obviously, we've got Ha'azinu Hashamayim V'Hadabera V'Tishma Ha'aretz Imrei Fi. So this is a good example for kind of the connection that you've mentioned in regards to Professor Kugel, not clear cutting between prose and poetry. In this case, doing this merismus that is.
No, I still disagree, because in Genesis 1, you don't have couplet after couplet after couplet after couplet. That's right. What you have in biblical verse. Okay? And there's also certain vocabulary that's only used in poetry and not in prose. And Kugel,
about 100 words, just to give.
Okay, I don't really want to get into a whole debate
right.
with Jim Kugel.
No. I'm just saying that when we talk about unique vocabulary colleague, for biblical poetry, we're talking about around 100 words.
Anyway, so there's what happens is that the poet creates structures of 2 or 3 or sometimes 4 lines together that are then understood to go together by the audience. And so what happens is the audience is helped to organize what the audience is hearing on the basis of these parallelisms. In other words, if there are 2 lines that are formed in a couplet together, then you make a connection between the 2 lines. If there are 3 lines together, you make a connection between the 3 lines, etc. It's like in rhyming in Western poetry. When 2 lines rhyme, you're supposed to ask yourself, what do these 2 lines have in common, right? What idea is conveyed by pairing these lines together? Okay, so anyway, that is the structural way of looking at poetry, and especially poetry in the ancient Semitic world and in the Bible. However, there's another way of looking at poetry, which is often the case in the Bible, but not always. And it's very common, though, in Western civilization, and that is what we call a poetic mode of representation, or it's basically seeing things in metaphor, seeing things in images, presenting things not in a descriptive way that would be appropriate for a scientific description, but rather in a kind of impressionistic way or an associative way, a personal way, in which you imagine that something is like something else and you present it that way. It's a poetic mode of representation. And we often find that in the Bible. We often find that in the book of Job, but we don't always find that in the Bible. For example, in the book of Psalms, you have a lot of imagery, but you can also have many Psalms where line after line after line is basically prosaic, except that the lines are structured as verse.
Okay. Could you also think of other examples? That is to say, a poetic mode description that is provided for us in a prosodic structure? I would, just off the top of my head, I can think of visions of prophets that are sometimes written in a prosodic way, but reflect this kind of a poetic mode of thinking.
Yes. Yes. There are many examples of metaphors in biblical prose, but there also are many cases in the Bible of using imagery inside a poetic structure or a verse structure. A really good example of that is Psalm 23, right? Hashem Ori, Hashem Roi Lo Echsor, right? God is my shepherd, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not be lacking, I shall not want. Okay, these are 2 short lines that form a couplet together, and basically there are no words that are paired to there. The structure of the 2 lines is different. Okay, there you have it at the top. The structure of the 2 lines is not syntactically the same, but they're 2 short lines. Hashem Roi Lo Echsor. But then you have two very long lines, relatively long lines. Binot desha yarbitseini, right? He makes me lie down in green pastures. Al mei menuchot yinahaleni. He leads me beside still waters, right? Etc. So you have two short lines followed, or one short couplet followed by a longer couplet. And in the second line, the syntactic structure is basically the same. And there's a kind of balance also in imagery between the pastures, the green pastures or the grassy fields and the still waters. Because what you have here, of course, is a single image of the psalmist seeing himself as a sheep or a goat being led by a shepherd, relying on the shepherd for sustenance, and beginning to describe how the shepherd takes care of the sheep or the goat, right? The small animal, by first of all bringing it to a green pasture where it can eat and where it can lie down and rest, and also bringing it to still waters where it can easily drink. Okay, so the image is very strong. Later on in the same poem, we have different images. For example, God setting a table for the psalmist in the face of the psalmist's enemies, right? Which is a military image, right? Of, we're at war, we're in battle, and yet God is taking care of me by setting me a table and allowing me to eat in peace while my enemy is confronting me.
It's also kind of the metaphor is kind of unveiled throughout the psalm. It starts with a very pastoral description in the very literal sense of the word pastoral. We have this sheep, and the imagery is that of a sheep, but soon enough, and verse 5 is certainly getting there, right? The setting of it, the spreading of a table is obviously not something that a sheep would eat from, or the kosi revaya, or dishanta v'shem enoshi. All this imagery is kind of unveiling the metaphor of the sheep and moving it to the psalter rather than the sheep, right? And that's gradual.
Right. And even in the next line, what is going to pursue me? Not the enemy. What's going to pursue me is goodness and devotion. God's devotion is going to pursue me all the days of my life.
Right. I was visiting the Garden Tomb, and the guide was a very funny pastor, and he said to me, he knew that I'm a Bible teacher, so he said, "Did you know King David had shepherd dogs?" I said, "No. How do you know he had?" He said, surely goodness and kindness will follow me all the days of my life. So that was their names, the dogs of King David when he was a shepherd. Yeah.
Well, that's an interesting interpretation. I don't think it's the only one. Okay. Anyway, so you have that a lot. And in the book of Job, which of course is, a text that I've devoted several decades to studying and the better part of 2 decades to translating, in conjunction with my work on the language and literary tropes of the book, we find quite a lot of imagery, and in contrast to most biblical poetry, there's sometimes in the book of Job, the poet takes an image and runs with it for quite a long time, and sometimes even comes back to it in the same chapter. And if not in the same chapter, he has the different speakers in the book pick up on the same metaphor from a chapter to chapter to chapter.
Mm-hmm.
Would you like me to give you an example of that?
Yeah, sure. Let's hear an example. We'll come back to some other questions, but as we're flowing, let's see an example.
Okay.
Just tell me which chapter to put on screen, and I'll
Okay. Now I don't know if everybody knows Hebrew.
Everybody can read Hebrew to varying
Everyone can read
levels.
Hebrew.
Okay,
Okay.
so
All right. So in chapter 3, for example, this is
the
just to take a
beginning,
simple
really the
example.
beginning of Job. Chapter 3 is the beginning of the
Beginning
poetry,
is his
or yeah.
first discourse. Yes. So in chapter 3, um, verse 24, verse 24, okay, I'll read it. Ki lifnei lachmi anchati tavo, vayitechu chamayim sha'agotai. Okay, so in most translations, let's see how they translate it. Okay, my groaning serves as my bread, my roaring pours forth as water. Not bad, but I think it's not exact. It's not exact. It doesn't serve as my bread, groaning, but it means he's trying to say that Job's suffering comes to him as often as his daily bread, which is like 3 times a day. Okay, so my translation is, for my moans come to me like my bread, and my growls are doled out like my water. Okay, where they translate roaring, I translate growls, because a lot of things can roar, and but the growls, I think, evokes where the image comes from. The verb sha'ag, from which this noun is taken, is used of lions,
Right,
especially.
lions have a special place in the book of Job. Yeah.
Yes, many times. Okay, so so Job is introducing the image of a lion by saying, by comparing the groaning that he has because of his afflictions to the growling of an animal like a lion. Okay, and there's also a lot we could do with the bread and with the water, but I'm going to just stick now to the growling of the lion. So if we now go to chapter 4, to the response of Eliphaz in verses 10, 11.
Already on screen, I was guessing you. Yeah.
Right, good. Okay. So there he had the first word is exactly from the same root. It's exactly the same word, except in the singular of the growls represented by Job in chapter 3. Sha'agat aryeh, v'kol shachal, v'shinei chefirim nita'u, layish oved mibli taref, uvnei lavi yitparadu. Okay, I'm not, the translation that you have is not terrible, but it's not, I think, as accurate as mine. So I'm going to read you mine. I hope that when you're listening to my translation, you'll see that I've made an effort to try to represent the translation in not the same rhythm as the Bible, but in a certain rhythm, so that the lines are rhythmic together. And I've also tried to represent where there's repetition of sound in the Hebrew. I've tried to represent at least some of that in the English, not necessarily the same sounds, but the idea of sound repetition, etc. The lion growls and the beast roars, but the teeth of the predators finally crack. The lion perishes for lack of prey, and the lion whelps are eradicated. Okay,
I could hear a lot of R's there.
Yes, okay. Yeah. Now also, I tried to use some different words for lion. This is one of the verses in Job where the poet shows his virtuosity in vocabulary. He uses 5 different words for lion, and they all mean lion. There are 5 different words. And there's another verse in a later chapter where he uses 6 different words for traps. Okay, he likes words. Poets very often love words. And this poet not only loves words, but he sometimes makes up words as well. And I think we can sometimes tell that. That's part of my contribution to the study of Job, is to try to advance our understanding of how the poet manipulates old expressions and how he invents new expressions. In any case, the point is that when Eliphaz uses the image of a lion, he's using it as a metaphor that is conventional in the Bible. We find it many times in the book of Psalms and occasionally in the prophets. And the idea is that the wicked are imaged as the as lions, right? Because they're predators. They prey on the innocent, right? They're aggressive. They're mean and cruel. They rip you apart, and they're bloody. And so the wicked are represented here by the lion. And what Eliphaz wants to say to Job is that, you know, he doesn't want to say that that Job, he says it later. He doesn't want to say that the righteous are going to, don't worry, the righteous will suffer, but they'll be okay later. So instead of talking right now about the righteous, he talks about the other side, the flip side of the coin, which is that the wicked. Because if God rewards the righteous for good behavior, God is supposed to punish the wicked. But of course, we all know, and some of the prophets like Jeremiah and Habakkuk complain that God allows the wicked people to prosper. And this seems not to be unjust. Just like making an innocent person suffer seems to be unjust. So what Eliphaz is saying here is, when you see the wicked prosper, it's only for a short time. Yes, it's true that you hear the roar of the lion, you hear the growls of the lion, you see the teeth of the lion being bared, but ultimately the teeth of the lions are shattered, and they can no longer bring food either to themselves or to their young, right? And so you have to understand that that's the way the wicked are. Yes, they prosper for a time, but they ultimately receive their just deserts, right? They'll be punished in the end. And at the end of this speech, toward the end of chapter 5, Eliphaz makes the same point about Job. He says, Job, I know you've suffered, you've had losses, but in the end, you will eventually get your estate back, and you'll find nothing missing. Everything that you had, you'll find again, and you'll have more children. You'll have lots of children later on. And that's how he ends it. And so this is one of the messages of Eliphaz to Job. It's, I think, it's a message that ironically comes to be at the end of the book. But Eliphaz doesn't know that. And so for now, Eliphaz is showing a certain lack of sensitivity to Job, because when your friend is suffering, you should comfort your friend in the suffering and not try to find good excuses for it.
Right, especially if the friend himself is comparing himself to a lion, and then you take that image and you say, oh, the lion is actually wicked and its teeth cracks, at the end. Right. So I don't know if that was the most sensitive, and coattailing some of the interesting point of views that you've provided us, maybe specifically two of them. I want to talk about one. When you demonstrated your beautiful translation of these two verses. First of all, your English is so beautiful, and unfortunately, I'm not a native English speaker, so I would probably never get to that level. But I enjoyed it very much. And what is the weight? Many of my students over the years, I've been teaching biblical Hebrew for 11 years, and I actually have a collection of translations of the Bible, about 80 different translations, and wow. Including Navajo Bible and others. So some of my students, they come to the courses with a mission of translating the Bible. I currently have a student who is translating the Bible into Lao, and he's bringing interesting questions to the discussion. Almost every week we talk about translation, and I find that oftentimes the students, they come with a very, very people who want to translate the Bible, the kind of knee-jerk reaction of them to the mission of translating the Bible is, I want to be literal. I want to be as literal as possible. That's kind of the default that they come to the table, and I want to hear from you about this tension between what's known as the original language and the target language, and what are the main points that you want to keep, especially in a translation of poetry, because I heard you, emphasizing, note that I did this and that and the other to keep like connection and not just keeping it literal. Second one is about the irony, but we'll get to it after this question. Yeah.
Okay, good. So let's go to chapter 3, verse 3, which is the first line that Job speaks in the dialogues.
Right. Yov ad yom ivaled bo vehalayla amar hor hagaver. Right.
Right, that's right. Very good.
All right.
Okay, so there are a number of things that you can point out in this verse. I'm very proud of my translation of this verse. So it's the one I would say I invested the most in.
And it's really the first. It's the first one, right?
And it's also a great line. It's a great line. Okay,
I
so
love it
first
as
of
well.
all right. So first of all, you notice that in the Hebrew, that we're dealing with two lines of a couplet that are balanced. They're about the same length. Yovad yom ivaled bo, v'halayla amar hova gaver.
There is a chance I wrote my paper in your course about this verse. Yeah, I'll have to look it up. But it was 9 years ago.
But I don't remember, after
right.
hundreds and hundreds of papers I've read since then. I can't say that I remember. Okay,
right,
however,
you reminded me, yeah.
Okay, but now let's look at this translation that you have on the screen, and I'll tell you what I don't like about it. It happens to be fairly literal, but it doesn't take the poetics of the line into consideration. Perish the day on which I was born, which of course is very prosaic, on which I was born. Also, perish is very soft compared to Yovad Yom, which is very strong open. Yovad Yom, perish today. It doesn't have the same impact. And now let's look at the next, let's keep going. And the night it was announced, a male has been conceived. Now it doesn't say a male, it says a man. And I know why they say a male. It's first of all, it's reflective of the ancient Greek translation, but in addition, they don't think that it's logical that Job would say a man was born. A male, sure, but a man not. However, they miss many things that are going on here. And I have to say that virtually everybody, until I spent a lot of time on chapter 3, everybody missed a number of important things in chapter 3. Okay, but let's first just talk about the translation, which is what you asked about. Okay, my translation is this. Let the day disappear, the day I was born, and the night that announced a man's been conceived. Okay, so the first thing you notice is the translation is not completely literal because in the first line, let the day disappear, the day I was born, the word day doesn't repeat twice. However, why do I repeat it twice? For two reasons. First of all,
one is the jussive and the other is the asymptotic structure.
Yes, right. One is to get the first line to be as long, more or less, as the second line, to lengthen it, but also to get the repetition of sound, the assonance of that line, so that in the line in Hebrew you have yo, yo, whoa, whoa. Okay? So in English, I try to repeat the same emphasis on sound, a repetition of sound, using these, right? Let the day disappear, the day I was born. Okay, so, and I think that let the day disappear has the same impact or a similar impact to Yovad Yom as opposed to perish the day. Okay.
Would you go with Yovad Yom reflecting this kind of woeing?
Yeah, well, because the Vav was originally pronounced W, so it's a lot closer in sound to the O. In any case, Yovad Yom Ivalebo, and then the second line, the Halayla Amar Hora Gaver, where you have two lameds and three reshes. And lamed and resh in ancient Semitic, and especially in Hebrew, are very closely related to each other.
Liquids,
right? They're called liquids, and they're also resonant. Right? They're two of the letters where there's a kind of vowel that's incorporated into the consonant. Oh, you know. Any
Yeah,
case, so
many
in
people
English,
have this difficulty distinguishing the L from the R. You know, it's close consonants. We're going to talk maybe in a week or two about consonantal co-occurrence in the Semitic languages, and the L and the R are part of that liquid group that, you know, functions as part of this picture.
So in my translation, I repeat the end, right? And the night that announced a man's been conceived. Okay, so I try to get it that way. Okay, now I can say a few more things. Okay, and first of all, in the translation you have on the screen, it says the night it was announced, but that's not what it says. It's the night that did the announcing. In other words, what we find here is a personification of the night. The night is the messenger that conveys to the community or to the family that a child has been born. And we know that because if you look at this entire section and you compare it to the passage in Jeremiah chapter 20, verses 14 through 20 or 18, I forget. Okay, there you find that the Job passage is a parody or a play on Jeremiah. But Jeremiah mentions his mother who gave birth to him, the father, right, who was told that he's got a male child, and the announcer. There's a person, a man, who announces to the father, a child has been born to you. So what you have in Job 3 is a complete avoidance of the mother. She's represented only by disembodied breasts later on in the chapter. We don't have the father at all. We have disembodied knees, where there was an ancient custom where a father would take a born child onto the knees to symbolize the legitimacy of this child, it's like recognizing, yes, this is my child and my son and my heir. And the announcer is personified here as the night. Now, Job he wants to eliminate the day that he was born and the night that he was conceived, which of course is a reversal in time because he was conceived before he was born. And so that flipping of the order is also a flipping of the ideas that you find in this chapter. It's very radical. If you give me a chance, I'll talk about that in another minute. Okay, but first, let me just finish this idea. It's the night that made the announcement, and he's called a man, by the way, because he's trying to remove himself from the birth experience. So instead of calling himself a child, which evokes the entire birth experience, he's trying to minimize the birth experience. He calls himself a man, which is how he relates to himself later on as well. Also, the use of the word gever, man, is also in ancient Near East and elsewhere in the Bible. For example, in the book of Lamentations, beginning of chapter 3.
Ani hagever ha'oni, right?
Yes. Gever there is the righteous sufferer, a person who is suffering, and so he uses that term. The term is very loaded for Job. In the same way that the first verb, yovad, which is Joseph, let it disappear, let it go into oblivion, right, is a curse. It begins a curse. And if you look at the end of the Song of Deborah, you'll see exactly that verb used as a curse. May all of your enemies perish or go, or I would say,
right.
Right. Let them all go into oblivion. Okay. Now, notice the verse is structured, as we said, in two parts, one for the day, one for the night. And so to me, it was very important to reflect that just the way the poet did in a couplet, one line for the day, one line for the night. And not these three lines that you find in this translation on the screen, which is also similar to almost all other translations. Almost all other translations double the length, or they give you a full length of the second line. But you see, by doing that, you miss the poetics. You don't appreciate how the poet is structuring the ideas, right, in a poetic pattern. And that's why I translate. I'll just read it to you one more time. Let the day disappear, the day I was born, and the night that announced a man's been conceived. So I
Reminds
depart
me,
from a certain literality there in order to convey the structure, the poetics of the line.
mhm, reminds me a little bit, yet not exactly, some of the concept behind the Buber-Rosenzweig German translation, in
Okay.
a sense. Again, I
Okay.
don't
I am
remember how they,
influenced.
right.
Right.
Go-
I am influenced by the Germanization of the Bible, as they called it, by Martin Buber and Franz Rosenzweig, which began in 1925, and Martin Buber finished it in 1962. Okay, Franz Rosenzweig himself died in 1929, but together they had actually translated like through Isaiah. But then, of course, you had the persecution of the Jews in Germany. Buber moved to the land of Israel. You had the Second World War and the Shoah. And so, but Buber decided to finish the job which he did, as I say, in 1962. One of the main principles of their translation was, first of all, yes, to try to represent a certain rhythm in their translation, as you find in the Hebrew. They tried also to follow as much as they could the ancient rabbinic or Masoretic division of the text into phrases. They also tried to use as much as possible the same word in German as you would find if there's a repetition of a word in Hebrew. If possible, if they didn't distort the sense too much, they tried to use the same word in German. This is called consonantal translation, and they also try to emphasize certain features of the Bible. For example, its use of certain theme words or leading words, which would convey a certain theme or idea throughout a passage, and those were very important to them to translate in the same way. Sorry?
Kind of a light vote, the concept
The light word, yes.
right,
Literally the leading word.
right. Comes
Sometimes we
by the
translate a
influence
theme
of
word.
music, leitmotif, and so forth.
Like a leitmotif in music. That's
Right.
exactly right.
And,
Yes.
and I think if we're already talking about this kind of a school of translations, you were involved, if memory serves, and correct me if I'm wrong, in the Schocken translation of Everett Fox.
That's right. I was very involved, especially in the first volume. Yes. In English, there are some people in the Netherlands who took a kind of Buber-Rosenzweig approach to translate the Bible into Dutch. But I think the main endeavor in the same direction today, especially, is that of my good friend Everett Fox, who's been translating the Bible into English using Buber-Rosenzweig's principles. He's so far published half of the Bible, the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, and the early prophets, as he calls them, the Nevi'im Rishonim, or the former prophets, that is Joshua through Kings. And he's been working more recently on the so-called literary prophets, or the poetic prophets, for the 3rd volume. I hope he finishes that and gets the 4th volume. I originally was hoping that my Job translation would be part of his 4th volume, and that Schocken would just publish it, as an independent book and then incorporate it. However, Schocken wasn't interested in talking about volume 4 till they saw volume 2. And so, but volume 2 came out in 2014 after I'd been working for several years with a different publisher at Yale on my translation.
Okay.
But I was a regular consultant to Everett Fox for the 5 books of the Torah. I read everything. I tried to keep him honest, to try to keep
I
him to his
love that
principles.
translation, by the way, and I use it in some of my teachings as
Good.
well.
I think it's the finest translation of biblical prose that we have. Everett Fox's 2 volumes so far. How he'll do with the poetics of the prophets is trickier. Also, the language is trickier. So we'll have to see how he does. But he did pretty well with the poems in the Torah, and some of them embedded in the like the Song of Deborah, for example, in the former prophets or the early prophets. So I'm hoping that he'll do very well. Yes, I'm very proud to have spent quite a lot of time at the time helping Everett Fox with that. And you know, I did it as mostly as a labor of love. I didn't get paid very much for it, but I got a lot of gratification from helping him doing what I believe is a very important project. And Everett influenced me. And in the preface to my translation, I expressed my hope that that Everett would see how much he influenced me. I hope for the better in my translation of Job. He's been pretty positive about this. As you can, he gave me a wonderful blurb on the back of the book, which I won't read for lack, I'm too modest to read what he and others have written there. But if you want, you can go to the Yale website or the Amazon website and check out the
Amazon,
book,
yeah, but
they
they don't sell it yet. I looked it up and they don't sell it yet. It will be.
No, they've been selling it a long time in hardcover, but a paperback.
Oh.
The paperback isn't yet available. There's a paperback with a few corrections in it, which is coming out in
August or something.
Late in the summer. The advantage of the paperback, I have to say, I'm very pleased that I only found one half a line in all of my translation that I thought I could translate better, and so I did. All the other corrections are just fixing typographical errors or adding a reference or two in a couple of the footnotes.
Okay. Now the second point. I still remember I had 2 points.
Yes.
You talked about the irony, and
yes.
in your papers about the Book of Job, you talk about 4 different types of irony that can be found in the Book of Job, and we won't get into the different types of irony, but given the famous Poe's law, Nathan Poe, and the fact that everything that is written ironically can be mistaken at face value by the reader,
Yes.
what does a translator do in order to convey irony, and can translate? Do you do something with it, or you try to keep it the same level of irony, to ramp it up a little bit, to dial it down a notch? What do you do with irony, especially since not everything is even agreed upon when it comes to irony? What's ironic, what's not ironic?
That's right. It's very hard. So sometimes you can use language, right? That comes out ironically in English, right? For example, let me see if I can give you an example of that. Let's see. Yes, at the beginning of chapter 12, you see what Job's friends have been doing. What Job's friends have been doing is to not only to argue with him, but also to quote proverbial sayings that they think support their point of view against Job. And Job gets a little fed up with this, and what he tries to show in chapter 12, which not all translators understood, is that he makes up a whole line of sayings, some of which sound like the friend's sayings, and some of them he just made up to the same tune, you might say, as the friends. So these are very ironic. Now he starts out chapter 12, and I'll read you my translation. Up spoke Job, and he said, "Truly you are people of intelligence, and with you wisdom will die. I have a heart just like you. I fall no lower than you. And who doesn't have such sayings as these?" And then he gives you all the sayings. Now, the entire thing is ironic. Okay? Now, how ironic he's being when he says, "Truly you are people of intelligence, and with you wisdom will die." By the way, that translation, people of intelligence, you won't find in any other translation. You find it because it was suggested to me by a colleague. That's why it's good to have smart colleagues who know things that you don't know. And one of my colleagues who knows some Egyptian suggested to me, I give him credit, by the way, in the footnote. I'm very good about acknowledging people I've learned from. Is that I say there's a likely play on the Egyptian word for intelligence, which is a regular Hebrew term for people. So when he uses the term, "you are also I think he doesn't just mean that they're people, he means they're people of intelligence. And I checked it out with someone who knows a lot of Egyptian, and he showed it to me in an Egyptian dictionary, ancient Egyptian. The word's there. I've seen it with my own eyes. I also learned from one of my teachers, more than one of my teachers, that you shouldn't trust what other people say. You have to check everything out for yourself. And I've always taught my students, and you, Netanel, also probably heard this, right? That you should check out everything your teachers say, including what I say.
Right.
You just don't take it for granted, right? But if you can, check it out. In any case, I'm not sure if he means this in a nice way. "Truly you are people of intelligence, and with you wisdom will die." In other words, when you die, a certain amount of wisdom in the world will be gone with you, because you really are wise people. But what he's saying is, "I have a heart just like you," right? And don't forget, the heart is the seat of intelligence in ancient Israel and in the ancient Near East. And so what he's saying is, I know what you guys know, and he proves it by quoting all of these lines of poetry. Now, so I'm not sure whether that is ironic or not. So I don't have a note pointing out that how ironic it is. However, later on, he says to his friends in the same chapter, verses 7 and 8, he says, "Rather ask the behemoth," right? This semi-mythological creature, which is sort of like a mythological, half mythological creature, half hippopotamus. "Rather ask the behemoth, and it will instruct you, or the fowl of the sky, and it will tell you, or converse with the earth," which I think is, I'm not the first one to suggest it. It's an abbreviation of the beasts of the earth, animals of the earth, "and it will instruct you, and the fish of the sea will recount to you." Right? In other words, you should get your information from the animals that are all around. Now, this is an irony. How do we know? Because it's a parody of a verse in Deuteronomy where Moses says to the Israelites, "Just ask your ancestors, ask your elders, and they will instruct you." So he's doing a parody there. So, and I say that in my footnote. It's a parody of Deuteronomy 32:7, and more immediately Bildad chapter 8, in which the teaching of the elders is recommended. So basically what he's saying is, you want to say, listen to the elders, and I say, listen to the animals, the beasts of the field. In other words, you can get your wisdom from them. So I don't think I have to point out the extent of the irony to the reader. In my notes, I try not to tell the reader things the reader should be able to come up with on his or her own. But where I think it's necessary, I point out an irony. In this case, by saying it's parody, I think I've led the reader sufficiently for them to make, for the readers to make their own judgments in this case.
Okay, Professor Greenstein, I really don't want to take more of your time, even though I still have so many questions. Would you be able to listen to some of the other people's question and take a question or two?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. I seriously have so many other questions, but as I said, I don't want to.
We all have questions. That's what we're here to do. Learning is all about asking questions and knowing that we're not always going to find the answers.
Okay. Ulrike, please.
Yes. I want to ask, how long was the suffering of Hiob? Normally, people focus the suffering as a never-ending story. And two preachers said some years ago he only suffered for 9 months. Is there any hint in the text to get knowledge about the suffering time?
Okay, that's a very good question. I wish I knew the answer. There's no answer given in the book. What we do know is that it was for a period of time. We know that he sat with his friends for 7 days and 7 nights without speaking at all. And so you have to ask yourself, when you hear the dialogues between Job and his friends, do you think that they had all these dialogues in one day, or do you think that it took them several days? But they're all together. So I would assume that we're talking about a period of time that isn't as long as several months, but it could be as long as a week or a few weeks. Now, toward the end of the book, the deity comes, God comes and speaks to Job and gives a long speech, and which is divided in 2 parts, and Job responds to both parts. And in everybody else's translation, Job gives in the end, right? He says, yeah, I'm sorry, I take it back. In my translation, Job is defiant until the end, and I haven't changed any words or anything. I've just interpreted the words without any monkey business. And I have to say that everybody else who's translated as though Job were Job had succumbed to the divine browbeating that he gets, they all have to cheat a little bit in their translation. I do no cheating. And that's why I think that my understanding of the end of the book of Job is catching on more and more. I actually learned it, much of it anyway, from a scholar named John Curtis, a British scholar who published an article in 1979. But very few people adopted it, and I took it further, and I tried to prove through Hebrew why the other people's translations were not possible, or at least were very unlikely. In any case, at the end of the book, Job is given back not his same family, I don't think, but he's given twice the amount of property he had and another 10 children. Now, how long does his suffering go? That's your question, and that's a great question, because at the very end of the book, it doesn't mention anything about Job's getting healed, right? This terrible, itching or whatever, this terrible skin disease he has that causes him to scratch incessantly. We don't know if he actually got healed. I assume that he did, because it seems the idea of the ending is to put things back to where they were. It's like the default position prior to the test of Job. And so he gets another set of children. He gets double the property. I think double the property because double is what you pay when you steal from somebody. You have to pay double. And I think that because God took Job's property away in an unjust way, God gives him back double. That's an interpretation, okay? It's not said in the text. That's an interpretation. You can look at it differently if you wish. But it's an interesting and open question whether he suffers till the very end. But he does live many years beyond that. So that's the best I can answer your question. I would say you read the book, and it'll be the smoothest reading, frankly, if you read it in my translation, because my translation also makes sense and explains in each chapter or each discourse what's going on in that discourse, because otherwise you can get lost in the wordiness of it all, and also the fact that many of the translations don't make sense from verse to verse. Mine, I think, does. In any case, you read it through, and you'll get an impression, and I'd say you should go with your impression. If you think it was a short time, then it was a short time. If you think it was a longer time, then it was a longer time.
Okay, thank you. Your explanation equals the scales for me of time. That it's not out of focus. This long speaking of God, it gives an what is it? Netanel Gleichgewicht.
Yeah, I'm not with my.
It's not out of equality. It
yeah,
comes together.
kind of an equilibrium, right?
I think so.
Racelis, let's.
Yes, I enjoyed your presentation very much, Professor Greenstein.
Thank you.
I would like to know, your translation notwithstanding, of the current English translations of the Bible that people have in their homes, which translation do you think does the best job with poetry?
With the poetry.
Yes.
Okay. Of the ones that people might have, I
Yes.
think the one that does the best with the poetry is the Revised Standard Version. Not the New Revised Standard Version, but the Revised Standard Version, which is an American Protestant product of about 1950, 52. I think that is possibly the best overall translation prior to mine. There are some good things in the New Jewish Publication Society Tanakh, but from a poetics point of view, they've got some nice things in there, but overall, but they miss a lot of things also. And I'm not that happy with it. Now, many people would say the King James can't be beat in terms of the poetics. And there's a certain sense in which that's true. However, to me, it's a very strong question whether reading a translation that gets so many things wrong is of benefit anymore. So it may be beautiful, but to me, it's not really the Book of Job. I think the Revised Standard Version does better, but it's not there. And I have to say, I'm quite partial to my own translation, not just because of the poetics. Even if you don't think it's beautiful, some people do, but even if you don't think it's elegant or beautiful, at least it makes sense. And what I learned from my teachers, studying ancient Semitic texts in general and Bible in particular, is that when these texts were written, they made sense. There's an argument here, and there's a connection between verse to verse, right? A section to section, chapter to chapter, etc. And I've tried to bring that out in my translation, and I think I've done more in that direction than any of my colleagues have yet done. They very often have translated the words in ways that are possible, but they haven't asked themselves, but now that I translated the sentence in terms of possible meanings of the words, does it now boil down to anything that makes sense? And I think that very often their translations don't. And I believe that mine does. You may not agree with my sense, but at least the principle of making sense is there.
Okay, and last one, Anthony.
Thanks. Hi, Professor Greenstein, long time.
Oh, yes, Anthony.
Yeah,
how
hi.
are you?
Yeah, I'm very well, by the grace of God.
Studied with me in the Pontifical Biblical Institute class about 10 years ago.
Oh, quite. I have a couple of questions. Job is a Edomite character, right? He's a character from the East. He's not
Wait,
a
am I
Jewish
right
character.
that you're Anthony from the Pontifical Biblical Institute?
No,
Yes?
I'm Anthony, who wrote the paper on the Doeg the Edomite.
Oh, yeah, okay, sorry.
Oh, Hadad the Edomite. Wait a minute,
yeah.
wait a sec. Let me give you my picture. Let me get my picture.
Yes. Oh, so from Bar-Ilan.
Yes.
Yes, I remember. You would sit near the back of the class.
Exactly. And
yes, yes, there you are. Sorry.
Oh,
Yes,
good to see you again.
Yes.
Yeah.
Good to see you too. You sat in the back of the class in Job all the time. Yes.
That's right. So now Job is a character from the East, and he's not a Jewish character.
Yeah.
What do you think? Why would he be parodying Deuteronomy 1 if he's not really from that genre? He's not from that realm. He's not from that world.
That's right.
And what do you think about the connection between the sevens of sacrifices in Job and the sevens in the book of is it Numbers with Balaam?
Numbers.
Oh, Balaam, yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
What do you think about? Does that place Job as Jobab? I'm wondering if Job is Jobab, that king in Genesis 36.
Yes, I understand. Very good.
So those are two questions. One, why would he be parodying Deuteronomy when he's not actually part of that world? He's actually from the East. He's not Jewish. And secondly, is it possible, because I've seen some clear connections between the sacrificing systems and they're the same people groups. And it could be the similar period of time.
Okay, good. Very good questions. Okay, so let me answer. Okay, first of all, the book of Job is clearly written basically in Hebrew. And it incorporates words, phrases, and sometimes even the better part of verses from texts that we know from elsewhere in the Hebrew Bible. Okay? So the poet is a Hebrew poet. He's a Judean poet, probably from the Persian period. But he knows, as you very well point out, the characters in the book are not Hebrews, right? They're not Judeans, they're not Israelites, they're from the East. Whether they're from Edom or whether they're from somewhere else in the Transjordan, they're from east of the Jordan River, okay? Right, they're called B'nai Kedem, people from Kedem, which is east of the Jordan. Okay, so the poet, though, is very, very sophisticated. And so the poet wants you to feel that these are foreigners, okay? So in order to give you the feel of the foreign, he incorporates words from east of the Jordan, like Aramaic words, and sometimes he doesn't use whole Aramaic words, but he uses Aramaic morphemes, right, parts of words, or Aramaic grammatical phenomena. He wants to have a flavor of east of the Jordan, Transjordanians.
Couldn't that
so
be
that
an
when you hear
Edomite
them
dialect?
speak, it sounds like they're speaking Hebrew with an accent, sort of. And of course, many authors that we know do things like that. They write in dialect so that you can...
Mimetic effect.
Yes, a mimetic effect, right. Okay,
but couldn't it actually be dialect? Because he is actually a twin. It couldn't be dialect.
No,
they are
I'll tell
twins.
You why. Because most of the verses are written in pure Hebrew. Now, but the Hebrew is, in my opinion, and I think that on this subject, my opinion is pretty pretty authoritative on the language of Job. That's one of the areas where I'm strongest, you might say. And that is, the idea is that not only does he make up language, as I say, but the is a little bit awkward. And I think it's because he learned Hebrew from earlier Hebrew texts in the same way that, in other words, Aramaic, in the Persian period, Aramaic was spread out throughout the Persian Empire as the lingua franca, the colloquial language. And I think that he probably was brought up speaking Aramaic, knew Aramaic, and he knew that his audience also knew Aramaic. So he was able to throw in Aramaic words and even Aramaic forms and even Aramaic sounds instead of Hebrew sounds, right? That in some words, like the Aramaic equivalent, in order to get them to hear these speakers as being foreign. Okay, now, because you brought up a really interesting point about Balaam or Bil'am in Numbers 22 to 24. You're absolutely right. It's not only in the 7 altars, etc., but there are a number of phrases that one finds in the book of Job that seem to be lifted from the oracles of Balaam or Bilam. And it may have a lot to do. Why specifically from there? Well, he quotes from a lot of places. He quotes from, the poems of Moses in the end of Deuteronomy. He quotes a lot from Isaiah, a lot from Jeremiah, from other prophets like Amos and Hosea or Hosea or Hoshea in Hebrew, right? He quotes from texts that we know from Psalms. He quotes a lot of stuff that we know from the book of Proverbs. However, you may be right that he specifically wants you sometimes to think Transjordanian when he uses a phrase from the Bilam stories, because Bilam is a Transjordanian, right? We're not sure. Scholars are divided about whether he's actually from Aram, from Aram, the center of the Aramean center in Syria, or whether he's from further down in the Transjordan. Not clear. But as you point out, the ancients, this is sure, in the Second Temple period, following the book of Job, Job's name, Eo, was associated with Yovav, who is one of the kings of Edom in Genesis 36. In addition, the names of Job's friends, as my teacher H.L. Ginsberg showed, but I developed it further to show how exactly this was done. The names of Job's friends are all taken as a kind of twisting of some of the names that you find among the Edomites in Genesis 36. It's clear to me that the poet wants you to think that Job is from Edom, he and his friends. And now, one more point, which you probably know, which I'll remind you, is that Bilam ben Beor, the name Bilam ben Beor, Balaam, son of Beor, who is brought by the Moabites to curse the Israelites, and is supposed to come from Aram, the name is almost exactly identical to Bela ben Beor, who was in the Edomite list.
Exactly, one of the kings.
Yes, he's I think the first, if I'm not mistaken, king of, but he's certainly one of the kings of the Edomites. And it's pretty clear to me that we're talking about the same character. So at least there is some tradition in Israel, some tradition in ancient Israel that associates these different legendary characters from the Transjordan, right? On the one hand, you've got Bela ben Beor, king of Edom, and you've got then Bilam ben Beor, son or a prophet from the Transjordan. Now, while we're on this, I'll just mention, you may also know that in the late 1960s, they discovered a plaster inscription written or paint on plaster, ink on plaster in the Transjordan, around where the Yabok crossing is, where Jacob is said to have wrestled with the divine being, right? And in a place that's called Tel Der Allah. And it's a text that comes from the period of the kings in Israel, from around the year 800 before the Common Era. And in this inscription, the lead character is Bilam, Bar, or Bir, which is the Aramaic word for son of, Beor. It's exactly the same name.
Same name.
And he's said to be Ish Choseh, a seer.
A seer.
A seer, which is, of course, a term that is similar to prophet in Israel. And so it seems like there's an effort made in the book of Job, right, by using these phrases from the Bilam story, right, in addition to other strategies to make you feel that when the people are speaking in the book, Job and his companions, that they are, in fact, east of the Jordan, not in the land of Israel.
Excellent. I'm very happy I gave others to ask questions because they kind of covered my questions, some of them at least. And thank you very much, Professor Greenstein, for coming.
You're welcome.
And thank you for being patient with our questions. I had a great time. I had a great time. We have this thing we do here, so we can clap the hands now. You can see everybody's. Okay.
Thank you, Professor.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right,
it was-
pleasure.
Thank you.
All right, I'm leaving now. Shalom to everybody.
Shalom, shalom, Professor
Stay well.
Greenstein.
Thank you. Thank
It was
you.
an
Thank you.
absolute pleasure.
Fabulous.
Stay well.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Brilliant.
Good to see
Thank
you
so
again,
much.
Professor.
Thank you.
Okay,
You too.
guys, a
Thank you,
little bit of
Netanel.
housekeeping.
Yeah, good to
A little
see
bit
you
of housekeeping
again.
tomorrow. No lecture.